Welcome to the supplementary video for Chapter 2, Classical Approaches to Organizational Communication. Here's the list of things you should understand after reading the chapter, all of which focus on understanding and appreciating the historical context of the Industrial Revolution and how this shaped our early conceptions of management and organizational communication. Before the Industrial Revolution, most work was fairly small scale and related to farming and agriculture, or artisan craft work, like a blacksmith, or local commerce, like a general store or hotel. But everything changed with the Industrial Revolution, when advancements in manufacturing technology ushered in a new era of large-scale factories, mechanization, and assembly lines. This had a tremendous impact on business and industry and raised big questions about how best to organize, how to coordinate and control work, and how to manage employees. During this time, a number of influential ideas emerged that would become the foundation for modern management practices and organizational communication. Chapter 2 focuses on Henry Fayol's theory of classical management, Max Weber's theory of bureaucracy, and Frederick Taylor's theory of scientific management. We'll explore each of these in more depth. All of these ideas incorporated advancements in modern science to improve production and efficiency, or seek to explain industrial practices in light of modern developments. And all the classical approaches to management and organizational communication share a common perspective: the machine metaphor. Classical approaches conceptualize organizations as machines, which is no surprise given the mechanistic advancements that characterize so much of the Industrial Revolution. Of course we would see organizations as a mechanistic reflection of the very machines used to accomplish industrial work. And thus a machine metaphor emphasizes work as specialized, standardized, replicable, and predictable. And of course this means that workers are understood as just cogs in the machine. So management and organizational communication from this perspective entails keeping all the cogs aligned and running smoothly, all in service of the overall production and efficiency of the machine. And this provides the context for understanding the earliest contributions of industrial management, which also provide a basis for thinking about organizational communication. First, the French industrialist Henry Fayol introduced his Elements of Management and Principles of Management in the early years of the 20th century, solidifying his reputation as the father of modern operational management theory. His 5 elements of management constituted the what of managerial work. What is management? 5 things: planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling. Now, the principles of management are his prescription for how managerial work should function. This is a much longer list, and our textbook does a nice job of organizing these principles around 4 thematic areas: principles of organizational structure, principles of organizational power, principles of organizational reward, and principles of organizational attitude. Make sure you read through all these principles to fully understand Fayol's theory of classical management, which dominated industrial work throughout the 20th century and is still practiced in many ways today. Second, German sociologist Max Weber developed the ideal type of organizing for 20th century industrial work: the bureaucracy. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is the best way to organize, but rather provides the exemplar for how most industrial work was organized and the standard for executives to follow. Bureaucracies are closed systems that emphasize a clearly defined hierarchy, division of labor, the importance of rules, and centralized authority. Now, this notion of authority is perhaps the most important aspect of Weber's theory of bureaucracy. He claims that authority, power, and discipline, all of which are essential to bureaucracy, come from 3 potential sources. 1, traditional or legitimate authority, like the king or the monarchy. 2, charismatic authority, based on individual personality and the ability to attract followers. Think of people like Jesus, Gandhi, or Martin Luther King Jr., or even Adolf Hitler or Osama bin Laden. And finally, 3, rational legal authority, which comes from the expertise and rationality in a system of rules and norms, not an individual person per se. And it is this notion of rational legal authority that dominates bureaucracies. People have power by virtue of their position in the system, and the position not necessarily the actual person, has that power because of the logic of the system. For example, professors have power and authority over students in the university system. But if I run into you at the grocery store, I don't have any power to make you pay for my groceries or carry them to my car, even though I'm your professor. On the other hand, if I get injured and another professor has to teach this class, students are now subordinate to him or her because they have assumed the position of authority. And that's what bureaucracy is all about: accomplishing work through the exercise of authority granted to various positions, agencies, departments, or bureaus. Thus the term bureaucracy. And finally, Frederick Taylor was an American businessman who introduced the idea of scientific management, which emphasized the micro-level work between managers and employees, specifically how to control work and make it more efficient and productive. Taylor's principles of scientific management stated that there was one best way to do every job, there had to be a proper selection of workers must be trained properly, and there is an inherent difference between managers and employees. Managers think and plan, employees work and labor. Taylor also emphasized time motion studies, where managers figured out the exact motions an employee should do to complete a task and the exact amount of time it should take to complete that task. So you could calculate the overall time and labor needed to accomplish work, and thus improving production and efficiency. So I hope you can see how these three classical approaches clearly illustrate the machine metaphor and the mechanistic thinking that was characteristic of industrial work throughout the first half of the 20th century. The implications for organizational communication are clear. If the organization is a machine, then communication is the flow of information that keeps the machine running smoothly and efficiently. This impacts the content of communication, task-oriented, the direction of communication, top-down, the channels or modes of communication, usually written, and the style of communication, mainly formal. And even though these ideas are presented as classical approaches rooted in the Industrial Revolution, they are still very much alive today. Just think of fast food restaurants or the military. Be sure to read the sections in our chapter that talk about classical approaches in today's organizations. And check out these questions at the end of the chapter to review the material and inform your discussion board participation this week. Next up in Chapter 3, we'll look at alternative approaches to organizational communication that rose in reaction to classical approaches: human relations and human resources.